Let's start with the collapse of Bashar al-Assad's regime army. One of the most striking scenes occurred at a military base in northern Syria, where over 50 tanks and armored vehicles were abandoned, scattered across training grounds and workshops. This base, one of Assad's largest, was supposed to be a bastion of defense for the Syrian regime, but fell in just one morning. Reports show that the regime's soldiers were completely demoralized and poorly equipped. In interviews, rebel fighters explained that the soldiers simply fled, leaving behind uniforms, helmets, and a mess that reflected the dire living conditions of the troops housed in primitive and makeshift facilities. This collapse was not only a reflection of rebel superiority, but also the profound structural failures within Assad's army, which was facing low morale, lack of supplies, and disconnected leadership. The rebel offensive, initially meant to be limited to a few villages just to test Syrian defenses in the Aleppo region, ended up expanding throughout the northeast, advancing relentlessly southward until reaching Damascus. This victory was propelled by a well-coordinated military campaign, with historically divided groups uniting under the command of Ahmad al-Shara, also known as Abu Mohammad al-Julani, and his faction, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, a coalition that was essential to overcome the logistical and military challenges that arose during the offensive. In Aleppo, a historic city that saw intense fighting during the years of civil war, the fall happened in just 3 days, and in the cities of Hama and Homs, the rebels managed to advance quickly with almost no resistance, a monumental shock for Assad's regime, which had fought for 4 years to recover the region with Iranian and Russian support. But why did Assad's army crumble so quickly? Reports point to a combination of factors like low wages, poor living conditions, and deep discontent among the soldiers. According to Syrian soldiers' accounts, the salary was less than $10 a month, low even by Syrian standards. The internal disorganization was also evident, with soldiers forced to improvise in building bunkers and ammunition depots. At one of the regime's bases, an armored vehicle was found crashed into a house, symbolizing the chaos of the retreat. Moreover, external support for the regime had significantly decreased. The crucial Russian and Iranian presence that once sustained Assad's army had diminished, further weakening the regime's defenses. With victory secured in Damascus in their hands, the rebels now face a monumental challenge: to rebuild Syria. The country is devastated, with military and civilian infrastructure in ruins, and the needs are enormous in all areas. The new leadership has announced ambitious plans to integrate different factions under a central command and to create a unified national army, involving not only military reorganization, but also attempting to overcome ethnic, religious, and political divisions that characterize the Syrian population, with Kurdish jihadist factions and even former regime allies posing serious threats to stability. The conditions for reconstruction are particularly challenging in cities like Homs, where vast areas have been reduced to rubble after years of bombings and siege. In Tel Rifat, rebel fighters struggle to maintain functional bases with rudimentary infrastructure and very limited supplies. In this transition phase, improvisation is the key word, with the regime grabbing everything at hand to try to govern the country. Another crucial aspect is the economy, with 14 years of civil war destroying the country's economic infrastructure and the most productive regions, particularly those with energy resources in the northeast, under control of factions not aligned with the new government. The challenge of integrating these areas and establishing a functional economic system will be vital to ensure stability. The promising message of inclusion with guarantees of protection for minorities and calls for members of the old regime to lay down their arms has been well received by some communities, with this approach helping to reduce resistance and avoid a spiral of revenge. But the practical implementation on the ground of these policies still faces significant challenges. Syria's future now depends on a leadership that can balance the country's reconstruction with the demands of a people exhausted by war. Rebuilding the population's trust is perhaps the most complex challenge. Civilians devastated by years of violence and displacement need a government capable of providing not only security, but also access to essential services like health, education, and employment. The soldiers who deserted, abandoning Assad's regime in its final moments, are an example of the complexity of this time. For them, the regime's collapse was a liberation, but the future is still full of uncertainties, with many wondering whether the new leadership will be able to offer more just and effective governance, or if it will fall into the same traps that marked the previous regime, clinging to power. External threats should not be underestimated either. The presence of foreign powers with competing interests like Turkey, Iran, and the United States continues to influence the country's fate. We must not forget Israel either, which watches and acts determinedly in the Golan Heights, fully committed to the mission of not allowing the new adversarial regime to take control of Damascus. Regional dynamics and diplomatic negotiations will be crucial in determining whether Syria can truly emerge as a sovereign and unified nation. Ultimately, the future also depends on the new government's ability to create a sense of national identity that transcends sectarian and ideological divisions, a task that requires not only political skill, but also a clear and inclusive vision for the future. The outcome of this effort will determine Syria's success or failure as a nation. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates.